This is Mr. Cardoso, and in this video we are going to look over the taxes program that you were assigned in class. So just a refresher of what this program is asking is this program will take in an income amount. So that's how much money you make. So it asks the user, how much money do you make? Or please enter your income. And outputs the amount of taxes that have to be paid according to the following scheme. So of course we all have to pay taxes on the amount of money we make. It's called income tax. So now income tax depends on how much money you make. So the less money you make, the less income tax you have to pay. Or the more money you make, the more income tax you have to pay. So this is how the scheme works in this program. The first $27,500 will be taxed at 17%. The next $27,500 will be taxed at 24%, and the remainder of the income will be taxed at 29%. So I've written some of the program here already, so that we didn't have to take the whole time here writing all the program, and we can just go over it. I've declared some variables here. There's a const here, so I'll talk about that in a little bit, but these are similar to variables. We've got our input section, where we are just asking for the user to enter their income. So notice I say put, please enter your income. And then this is a nifty way of putting a $sign on the income line. So we put a $sign indicating to the user that we want dollars. And then I put 2 dots so that the get will actually come right after the $sign. You'll see that when we run the program. And so when the user enters how much money they make, it goes into this variable called income. So the input section is done here. That's the only thing we need to get for input. Processing we need to do. Okay, you can see it's empty. And then of course the output is done as well. Of course, right now if we try to output this, we wouldn't have any value in tax. We would get an error because we didn't put any value in tax. We didn't calculate it yet. And that's what the processing section we are going to do together. But it says anyway, on an income of, and this is the same as the inputs, you will pay this much tax. So we need to calculate this. This is our output. Okay, so now just if we go back up here to the top, we've got 3 variables: income, tax, and leftover. In fact, if I put these on separate lines, just so that you can see, I can put a comment then on what each one represents. So this is a real variable because it's going to have decimals. For example, it's money, so it could be 27,550 cents. Okay, so because of the 50 cents or whatever cents, you want to have a decimal, so that's why it's a real and not an int. Okay, so I can put a comment here just to describe to you what this variable is for. This, or let's just say represents the amount of money made. Okay, and that's the input. I can put here in brackets, that's the input that we're asking for the user. Then I'm going to declare the tax. So the tax is what I'm calculating, and that should be a real as well. So calculated by the program. So that's not an input, but we're calculating that. That's actually the output. And leftover is a helper variable. That's good, and you'll see what this is shortly. So let's just put right now it's a helper variable. It's not input and it's not output, but we need it along the way. Okay, so maybe that helps a little bit more understanding what these variables are for. Now we've got these consts things. We've never actually talked about const before, so this is a good moment. Const is actually a short form for constant. Okay, so they're very similar to variables, except they can't be changed. Okay, so if I say const tax bracket 1 colon equals 0.17, and then I try down here and I say, tax bracket 1 colon equals 18, it won't allow me to do that because it'll give me an error and say, look, you've declared tax bracket not as a variable, not as something that changes, but as something that is fixed. it has a value, and then you can never change it throughout the program. Okay, so that's why when we declare, because we are declaring this constant here, when we declare this constant, we have to give it a value in the same line, because forever else in the program you cannot change that value. It's a constant. Okay, so from our good programming style here, you can figure out what this is representing, tax bracket 1. So that's if the person earns less than $27,500, they earn less than that, then they only pay 17% tax. Okay. Now, if you earn more than $27,500, it's a little bit more complicated. So let's say you earn $30,000. If you earn $30,000, you're not paying 24% tax on the entire $30,000. What you're doing is you're paying 17% tax on $27,500, and then you're paying 24% tax on the difference, on the leftover. So that would be $2,500. So that's what this leftover variable is for. Okay, and then tax bracket 3, similarly, if you're over $55,000. Okay, so that's how we break it down. So let's just put some examples here. So I'll put an example. Income equals 30,000. That's just what I said. Okay, then you would have to pay 17% on 27,500 and 24% on 2,500, which is the difference between this and 30. So 30,000 minus 27,500 will give me $2,500, and that would be our 24% we would pay on that amount, and then 17% on that 27,500. Okay, and similarly, if we did an example here, it's going to be a little bit longer. Okay, let's say the income here was $55,000. I'm sorry, $60,000. Okay, that means we would pay 17% again on 27,500. Okay, that's always, the first $27,500 will always be 17%, no matter how much money you make. Okay, but then we would pay 24% on the next $27,500, because that would take us up to $55,000. So on 27,500, because that takes us all the way up to 55,000. Okay, so this and this. Now, if you add this and this, we get $55,000. Of course, the person makes more than $55,000. They make exactly $5,000 more. So that's where the 29% comes. Oops, what did I do? That's where the 29% comes in. So we pay 29% tax on the remainder, or the leftover, $5,000. Okay, and you can see that this is where this variable comes in. Leftover is going to keep whatever's remaining. In this case, it's 2,500 on top of the 27,500, and in this case, it's $5,000. $5,000 on top of this 60,000, on top of the $55,000 that's made up by these two. Okay, hope that makes sense. So we've got our three tax bracket constants. Now, if I return to the constants again, the reason why we have the constants, we don't really need them. We can hard code, 0.17 into our code here. We can have 0.17 here. But it's better for programming style, because you see this tax bracket 1, and you know what it stands for, whereas the 0.17, it's a little bit confusing. Tax bracket 1 and tax bracket 2 and tax bracket 3 are sort of self-explanatory when you see them in the program. Also, if we go next year and the government decides to change these values, now I only need to come up here and change them once at the top of the program, rather than every time they occur throughout the program. So that's another benefit of using constants. So again, constants are different than variables because they can't be changed, and you must assign a value in the same line. And also notice that we are not, we don't have to put the type of variable like real, int, or string here, because by the value it figures out what type of variable it needs to be. Okay, so let's move on to the programming part. Now we've got the income. This is how much money they make. And so basically, we've got to break it down into these three scenarios. So we start by using an if statement. The simplest scenario is if the person makes less than $27,500. So we didn't do an example here, but let's do an example. So if the person, let's say, makes $20,000, then the income tax, then the tax is simply 17% on that amount. Okay, no more, no less. It's just a flat rate, 17% on that 20,000. So we say if the income is less than or equal to $27,500, then we can figure out the tax. So let's figure out the tax now, because that's what we're trying to do. So we want to figure out the tax. Notice how I indent because I'm inside the if statement. So the tax is equal to the amount of money they make, which is income, times, and so here I could write 0.17, but that's what I have my constant for. So I can copy and paste my constant here. Okay, so again, like I said, if I need to make any changes, I just need to make the change once and it trickles through. Okay, so that's it. So that's all we have to do, and that would be, in this case, for example, $20,000 times 0.17, and that will give us the amount of tax. Okay, so that case is covered. That's the easiest case. Now, let's go to the next case, and the next case will be, let's jump over the middle one, because the middle one has two borders. It's got to be more than 27,500, I'm talking about the income, and less than 55,000. So instead of doing that one, let's jump to the last one where we just know strictly it's more than 55,000. So we can jump and change the order a bit. So if the income is greater than 55,000, let's jump to that last one. You can do it the other way, it's just a little bit more complicated, that's all. So if I jump now to over 55,000, that means I have three parts, okay? That means my tax is going to be equal to, first of all, so I break it down here, 17% on 27,500. So I'm going to say, tax bracket 1, or income, sorry, not income, income is the whole amount, so that would be the $60,000 in this example. So we want to say 27,500 times, I'm not going to put spaces in so I can, because this is going to be a long line, I think, times tax bracket 1, we're going to have three parts here, plus, so that takes care of this part. Now we need to do the 24% on the next amount, so 24% on the next amount. So that's another 27,500 times tax bracket 2. Okay. So this amount now, if you add these up, because we're over, the income in this case is over 55,000. So that means this plus this will get us exactly to $55,000. Now, we need to figure out what's left over. We did that in the example by subtracting this from 55,000, or 55,000 from this amount, because that was the amount of income. Okay? So actually, I can have a line up here just before this. Figures out how much is left over. So the amount of money left over is going to be the income, which in this case is 60,000, minus 55,000. Because in this case, we know the income is more than 55,000. We know that. That's why we have the if statement. So income minus 55,000 will give us that leftover, and that leftover will be taxed at 29%, or in tax bracket 3. So I'm going to put here leftover times tax bracket 3. Okay, so there I have the three segments. See, if we earn over 55,000, we have to pay 17% on the first 27,500, 24% on the next 24,500, and then 29% on the remainder of what's left over when you take out that 55,000 of these two from the income. Okay, so that's what we've done here. We've done the three parts. Okay, now, because I've taken care of the two cases, the last case can simply be an else. because if it's not less than 27,500 and it's not more than 55,000, then it has to be between those two values to get to this else. So I don't need to put an else if with a condition. I can just go straight into the calculation. And this one's slightly simpler than the last one. So this is like the 30,000 case here, example number 2. So again, I have to figure out what's left over. And in the same way, I say the leftover is equal to the income minus, in this case, 27,500. Okay, just like here, if the income is $30,000, it's going to be $30,000 minus $27,000, which gives you $2,500, which is what's left over. So I do income minus 27,500. Okay, and now in this part I have two sections. So I go tax colon equals, and so it's going to be 27,500 times tax bracket 1. You have to get it exactly right. Plus, now it's going to be left over times 24% for tax bracket 2. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And now we've done with that, so we can say end if, this end if ends this if structure. Okay, and then that should do it. Now we have our outcome. So we run our program now. Here's our, so we run it. Notice how we got the $sign here, which is what I mentioned before. It's a nifty little way of putting the income right on the same line. So if I put $20,000, you know, it gives you the $3,400. You can check on your calculator. I'm checking on my calculator here. If I do 20,000 times 0.17, I get 3,400, and that's all it should be. That's the simple case. It's less than 27,500. Let's test another one in between. So let's test 30,000. If we put in 30,000, okay, on your calculator, you should check. Okay, so it should be 27,500 times 17%, so that's 4,675, plus 2,500, which is what's left over, times 0.24. That's taxed higher. Okay, and that gives us 5,275. So that works too. And then of course you can test your last one. I won't waste your time here, but you can test that out and make sure you get that result. Okay, so that's doing the 3 different parts. It's really good before you program this, you know, and if you're struggling to understand some of these lines of code I've written here, to really work it out on calculator as if this is not a computer science problem at all. In fact, it's just a simple math problem. And once you figure out how to calculate it, you'll understand these lines a lot better. Okay, I hope that helped.